A silent story of forbidden feelings, family betrayal, and final goodbyes. The winter air was sharp as he stood outside the hospital, his breath forming pale clouds that vanished into the stillness of the evening. Snow blanketed the pavement, untouched and silent, a cold canvas upon which time had painted nothing. In the distance, city lights flickered like dying embers, their glow weak against the night. Years had passed, yet the weight of memory clung to him as though it had never left. It pressed into his bones, filled his lungs, and settled against his chest with a heaviness he couldn't shake. Time, it seemed, had no interest in Mercy. Their connection had always existed outside the boundaries of simplicity. It had bloomed quietly, without words or intention, like ivy slowly climbing the walls of a life already spoken for. There were glances shared in the dusty silence of the university library, lingering looks between pages of books neither could later remember. There were moments in crowded hallways, brushes of fingertips beneath passing coats, and silent acknowledgments of a truth neither dared admit. There had never been confessions, only presence the kind that spoke louder than language. But life, indifferent and unwavering, followed its own script. Dreams deferred, choices made not out of desire but out of obligation, and fate, relentless in its unfolding, had other plans. She married his brother. Mincio entered the family as a bride, not of passion but of purpose. Her arrival had been spoken of in hushed tones and measured approval. She was intelligent, refined, and the daughter of a family whose name carried weight. It was a match forged through expectation, sealed with formality, and upheld by duty. She stepped into their home wearing white silk and a smile too composed to be real, while he stood at the edge of the room, his hands clenched, his heart retreating into shadow. His brother, Jisoo, was everything the family had built its hopes upon the eldest son, the leader-in-waiting, the name that would carry on the legacy. He moved through life with the confidence of someone who had never been denied, who never needed to ask permission. The narrator, the second son, bore the weight of lesser expectations. He was the echo, not the voice, the one who followed, not the one who led. In silence, he buried his feelings that had sprouted long before Minso had worn Jisoo's ring. He told himself it was right. That sacrifice was a kind of love. That loyalty demanded silence. He taught himself to forget, to hold the truth so tightly it would suffocate within him. He learned to smile when she entered a room, to speak her name only when required, and to look but never linger. Yet emotion, no matter how deeply buried, finds its way to the surface. Nights proved the hardest. When the world slept and the house sank into quiet, he would see her standing alone in the garden. She would look at the moon as though waiting for it to speak, the light tracing her features with a silver melancholy. From behind a window he watched, unseen, uninvited. The boundary between them, though invisible, was immutable. Still, her presence anchored him. Even from a distance, she gave shape to his silence. There was never a conversation, never a confession. Just an ache that lived between glances, an unspoken bond built not on words but on restraint. Seasons passed. The house changed with the years, but the distance between them remained suspended in place. Until it didn't. One autumn evening it all unraveled. Perhaps it was the way the wind stirred the leaves, or how her shoulders trembled as she stood alone, or perhaps it was simply time. A moment unfolded fragile and irreversible. Emotions unguarded, walls lowered by exhaustion. In a breath, something forbidden crossed between them. It had not been planned, but it had always been waiting. In that single moment, everything shifted. Before reason could reassert itself, before either of them could retreat into the roles they had rehearsed for so long, it happened. And then it ended just as abruptly when Jisoo stepped into the silence and saw what they could not undo. He said nothing. His silence was more devastating than fury, more absolute than violence. It was a verdict passed without trial. His eyes, once filled with the warmth of shared boyhood, now held only distance. The silence that followed was not born of contemplation, it was exile. The consequences arrived swiftly. The narrator was cast out. No dramatic confrontation, no public scandal, just quiet elimination. His name was removed from family registries, and his belongings were cleared without notice. The family stopped speaking of him, as though his existence had been a rumor corrected. Friends offered no comfort, unwilling to be caught between two brothers. His mother, forever the quiet negotiator, sent him a letter without affection. "We must protect what remains. Do not return." Mincio stayed, though whispers said she had been sent away sequestered in another house far from the city, cloaked in the invisible prison of scandal. There were no photos, no news. Her name surfaced only in brief, veiled mentions. Her presence faded from the world that had once celebrated her entrance. She became a ghost in her own life, bound by silence as much as he was by exile. He built a new existence, another city, another language, another version of himself. In this new life, he created a daily rhythm that dulled the sharp edges of memory. He kept busy, clinging to structure. Work consumed his time. Relationships came and went, each one bearing the impossible task of replacing a love that had never been spoken aloud. He tried to forget, telling himself that distance could cleanse the heart. But Minso remained, a quiet presence in the back of his mind, like a melody remembered long after the lyrics had been lost. Years passed. His hair grew a little grayer. His heart, though scarred, beat steadily. He stopped trying to predict the future, and the past became something he lived beside rather than ran from. Until the letter came. It arrived without ceremony, tucked between advertisements and utility bills. There was no return address, only his name in handwriting he recognized instantly. The letters were shaky, as though written with fingers that trembled from illness or exhaustion. Inside, the message was brief. No explanations, no apologies, just a request. She wanted to see him. The letter changed everything. The letter stayed on the kitchen table for 2 days, untouched but never out of sight. It seemed to pulse with its own gravity, anchoring him to the present, even as it dragged him back into everything he had spent years trying to forget. Though the words were few, they carried the weight of a history never lived and a future already lost. Eventually, the silence broke within him, not with sound, but with movement. He packed a small bag, locked the door behind him, and boarded the earliest train. The city he returned to had not changed in the ways he had expected. Its skyline had stretched taller, its streets had grown busier, but its rhythm remained the same, impersonal, efficient, and cold. Snow fell steadily as the train arrived, a silent curtain over memory. He walked through the streets like a ghost retracing old paths, each step echoing with a version of himself he no longer recognized. The hospital stood on a quiet hill, sterile and gray, the kind of place designed more for containment than comfort. Inside, time moved differently. Clocks ticked but felt irrelevant. Everything was hushed, as if even sound feared disturbing the fragile lives held within its walls. Nurses passed by with practiced ease, their faces unreadable. He gave her name at the reception and was guided through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. She was in a private room at the end of a long hallway, as if placed deliberately away from the rest. When he stepped inside, the years collapsed in on themselves. She was smaller than he remembered, her body diminished by time and illness. Her face was pale, its lines deeper, and her hair thinner and streaked with gray. Yet beneath the physical toll was a presence that time had not erased. The same quiet gravity lingered in her features, the same stillness that had once held him captive without a single word. Her eyes opened slowly when he approached, recognizing him not with surprise, but with the inevitability of someone who had always known he would come. There were no words spoken, none were needed. He sat beside her, and they simply remained like that for hours, in silence, in shared breath, in a stillness deeper than language. Machines beeped softly around them, indifferent to the weight of memory or the depth of regret. He watched her hands, fragile and folded against the blanket, the veins visible beneath her skin like rivers drawn thin by winter. Every so often, her chest would rise and fall with the effort of someone nearing the end of a long journey. Each breath was a labor, each moment a quiet fight against finality. Time in that room became shapeless. Minutes and hours blurred. He fed her sips of water when the nurse nodded. He adjusted the blanket when she stirred. But mostly, he stayed still, watching, remembering, bearing witness to what remained. Her presence brought back everything he had buried: unlived moments, stolen glances, all the imagined futures they had silently constructed in the spaces between duty and desire. He thought of the garden where she once stood beneath the moon, of the brief moment in autumn that had undone them both, and of Jisu's gaze as the world fell apart. He thought of how silence had always followed them, not just the silence of circumstance, but the kind that grew between people who knew the truth and chose not to speak it. That silence had been their sanctuary and their sentence. As the days passed, she grew weaker. Her movements slowed and her eyes opened less often. But she still looked for him when she stirred, still reached out when she could. Sometimes she would lift her hand, not toward him, but toward something he could not see, perhaps reaching for a memory, or searching for something that had never arrived. He let her hand rest against his face once, her fingers cool against his skin. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it carried a lifetime. In that single moment, the years between them folded into nothing. The pain, the loss, the longing, it all settled into that simple gesture, as if forgiveness could live inside the quiet curve of her palm. There had been so much he had wanted to say. He had imagined the words for years-long confessions, questions never asked, apologies never offered. But now, in this room filled with the soft hum of machines and the final hours of a life, the words felt empty. What remained was not language but presence. Not explanation, but the fact that he had come. And that somehow was enough. The final day arrived without announcement. The snow outside the window continued to fall, steady and unrelenting. The nurse moved quietly, making adjustments with a tenderness that revealed an understanding of what was coming. The light in the room was dim, the sky outside already fading to dusk. He held her hand as her breathing slowed. The machine that tracked her heart began to falter, the rhythm uneven, struggling. Her chest rose once, twice, and then no more. The sound that followed was not silence, but a kind of stillness that echoed louder than anything else. A finality that stretched across time, folding every missed opportunity, every forbidden feeling, into a moment that had no breath left in it. He remained there long after she had gone. The nurses came and left, offering him space, perhaps out of kindness, or perhaps because they recognized the weight of what had passed between them, even if they did not know its story. Eventually, he stepped out into the cold. The snow had deepened. The streets were blanketed in white, hiding the scars of the world beneath it. The city moved as it always did, unaware and unchanged. Cars passed, lights flickered, and strangers walked with heads down, wrapped in their own concerns. For him, time had stopped. He stood at the edge of the hospital entrance, the cold cutting through his coat, his breath misting in the air. The world felt distant, like something he was no longer part of. In his chest, the ache remained sharp, unspoken, and enduring. He had loved her in silence, lost her in silence, and now carried her absence in that same silence. There had been no dramatic reunion, no redemption, no justice, only moments, fleeting, quiet, and true. He walked without direction, letting the snow soak into his shoes, the chill creep into his bones. Around him, the city lived on. Laughter echoed from a passing car. A streetlight blinked to life. Somewhere, music played faintly behind a window. He looked up at the sky, heavy with clouds. The snow continued to fall, covering everything, erasing footprints and softening edges. It was a world reborn in white, untouched and indifferent. In that stillness, he carried her memory not as a story to be told, but as a presence that would never leave. A part of himself not lost, but hidden beneath the snow, waiting perhaps for spring.